Podcasting worldwide from Vancouver, Canada. Welcome back to the Personal Process Podcast. The show that takes you through the growth, hardship, self-discovery, lessons, and stories of individuals who achieved success in their own personal path. Trust the process.
Welcome back to the Personal Process Podcast. Today, we are beyond happy to have my friend Joseph Green. He is a critical care paramedic, and I'm not sure if you noticed, but I love interviewing paramedics because they have amazing stories. And yeah, so Joseph, how are you doing today, sir? And is there anything you'd like to add to the introduction?
No, that's it. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me on here.
Right on, right on. So Joseph, you have a kind of like a lineage in medicine. Do you mind giving us a little background on that?
Yeah, so my mom was a nurse for years. She was a NICU nurse primarily, kind of most of her career. And my dad, they met when they were 21. He was a volunteer firefighter in the community that I was born in, also a lifeguard when he was younger. So I kind of grew up always kind of in like the little first response medicine field. So
Right on. And I guess what inspired you to take paramedicine up as a career?
So it was completely like just a spur of the moment decision.
Really?
I was in college for psychology, and I just went to my mom one day and I was like, I'm not happy. I don't want to do this. I did my senior project in high school on being a firefighter, and I was like, this is just boring. And my mom's like, go be an EMT. And we had kind of like a not the best financial situation, and the way school was Monday through Friday, and I was like, oh, well, I can't do that. It'll put too much stress on everybody. And we were sitting in the bathroom. She was like, Joe, if you want to do it, go do it. You're a smart kid. And changed my classes the next day and never looked back ever since. So
Right on, right on. So when you first made that change, let's get into that because Joe, that is an experience that can be, kind of extrapolated to many different options. How did you feel the second you made that change and I guess the week of?
So the second I made the change, it was like doing the whole psychology thing was my comfort because my classes were online. I could stay home. My mom had a car, but I didn't just because of financial stuff. So I was like, okay, this is comfortable. And then the minute I signed up for EMT, I was like, oh, like this is where the rubber meets the road. Time to, put your game face on. And then I walked in the first day of class and like it just felt normal. It felt like I'd known these people for years and I've never even met these people. So like it just felt right. And for the first time since I graduated, it finally felt like I was doing something the right way. So I was like, okay, we'll stick with this for a little bit and see where it goes.
Right on. So it finally felt like you were doing something the right way. Do you mind like elaborating on that? Like, what does that mean to you?
I guess it was just kind of like we'll probably end up elaborating on this later because it kind of ties into everything. But like the way I'm from North Carolina. We moved to Tennessee in 2011, and from like 2011 until like 2016 when I started EMT school was just like Murphy's Law kicked in. If anything could go wrong, it would go wrong all the time. So finally, like once EMT school happened, like for the first time since we moved to Tennessee, like, okay, this is why I came here. This is why I'm supposed to be here. So it just, a lot of people don't believe in superstitions and just, feeling the right vibe. But for once, like it felt like I was in the right place.
Right on. So let's get into the schooling. And how long is the schooling in North Carolina for EMT?
In North Carolina, I will do Tennessee because I'm kind of more familiar with that, and it's kind of universal across the board. So Tennessee, you do a semester and you get your EMT basic. EMT basic's kind of like it's a glorified first aid. You can give oxygen and splint. It's good for, like a lot of fire departments use it because it's just, you know, you can have someone who's an EMT on the roster and still get your medical side of things in. And then second semester, you do your advanced, and that's when you can actually go work on an ambulance and stuff like that. And advanced EMTs, they can do IVs, give some more medicines, do everything the basic can do. And then you can use like different kind of airways. So if someone's having like breathing troubles, instead of like putting a tube down their throat, you can put one in their mouth, just kind of help them breathe a little bit better. Right. And they just have a different set of skills than an EMT basic does. So it's just a little upgraded license. And then after advanced, you have your paramedic, and that is a year of just like total chaos with life and everything. Then you learn how to defibrillate people. You have probably about 50 to 100 drugs you have to memorize everything about how they work.
That sounds like fun.
Yeah, you can intubate people. Just the list is so long being a paramedic, and you compress all this stuff that pretty much a doctor can do into a year of school.
Right.
And
Right.
plus you have clinicals, and a lot of us, we still work while we're in school because we had families. There's stuff like that, so it's very it's interesting. That's when you kind of learn, okay, like, is this for me? Is this not for me?
For sure. For sure.
Then
And
you're finally running the show at that point, especially like your last semester of school. Like whenever you go on a clinical, like you're running the call. It's not your preceptor anymore. Like you're running the call and he's just standing in the background. So
for sure. For sure. So there's two things that I want to get into, because I do want to get into how it felt like going from student to, getting your hands dirty and being in charge. And that's a pretty, unique situation that I don't think a lot of people even can comprehend what it feels like. So I want to get into that. But before that, Joseph, I want to ask you, I guess, what was your goal when you first went into the schooling? Did you see yourself just getting the basic first aid? Did you see yourself going forward? How was that like?
it was kind of, I never really knew. I kind of knew like I had all these like, I have ADHD. I just don't take meds for it. I swear. Because like my brain was just, okay, I'll go do this. I'll go do this. But at the same time, it was like, okay, take it one day at a time. And I did that first semester, and I've always been a terrible student. Like I just never really cared about school or anything like that. And for the first time, like I got straight A's. So I was like, okay, like
Right.
there's something here that like there's something here that you're doing good at. Um, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I kind of wanted to go work on the ambulance, but I also wanted to go be a firefighter. But in Tennessee, you can't really work anywhere as a basic, so you have to do that second semester of advanced.
Right.
So I was like, okay, you still got 4 more months. After I finished my basic, I went and volunteered at a local fire department. Very like, kind of mixed of like rural kind of city, very low volume. They run like 5,000 calls a year. And that's when I kind of started getting my hands dirty and running more of the show. And at that point, I was like, I'll go be a firefighter. But after advanced, I kind of learned like I wanted to take a different route with it. So,
Why is that?
one, I have asthma, and that was a big disqualifier. Was having asthma is like an automatic no. And
Fair
two,
enough.
I don't know. I felt like I remember I had one call, and I was like, you can make more of a difference in someone's life by doing this than like, not to rag on any of my firefighter buddies, but you can like, yeah, putting out a house fire, like it makes a difference, but like, sitting holding like grandma's hand at 3 a.m. after she broke her hip, or like having that conversation with someone after a loved one just died means a lot more versus, okay, like I just lost my house, but these guys were here for me, versus like having those tough talks and being there somebody in those first times or rough times.
For sure. For sure. And that dives into a different aspect of this whole, conversation so far, Joseph. Did you ever expect your field to have so much communication in it? And I guess what surprised you about that, if you were surprised?
They talk about it in school, like always talk to your patients and stuff like that. And so, I mean, I was kind of prepared. I was never really the best talker. So that was one thing. Like the skills were good. I could put it on book on the streets, but communication was always one of those things. And like, it took a while, but I guess it's good because, like, yeah, you can take care of your patient, but there's also that other aspect of like making sure your patient is like aware of what's going on and like the future steps and stuff like that. And I feel like that's a lot of things like my peers forget. It's like, okay, well, like, if you have someone that's having a heart attack, unless you've had one before, you don't know what the next steps are. So it's like, hey, sit down beside them and say, hey, such and such, this is what's going to go on next. And here's going to be your next few days. And it helps calm their mind a little bit. Because, you're the last face they see until the worst moment of their life happens.
Yeah. And that's a stressful situation. I guess. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good segue to get into that other question that I wanted to ask. So let's talk about that. You're in school, you have your preceptor, you have your teachers looking over your shoulder. Okay, do that, Joseph. Okay, do that. Oh, that's right. Oh, that's wrong. And you graduate. Do you remember what your first day was like on the job, and any cool stories?
Absolutely terrible. I remember I went to the fire department. It was like it was my first shift. I just got my t-shirt, my radio. And like the tones go off. I'm like, oh, okay, this is cool. And it's a baby delivery. I'm like,
Man.
okay, like, all right, here I am, like little 19-year-old kid about to go deliver a baby. And thankfully it wasn't like that. The only worst thing was the ambulance was coming from like 25 minutes away. So, you had to sit here with her for 25 minutes and like screaming, freaking out, first kid. And it was like, I'm glad it happened because it really set the tone and it really, makes you, okay, hey, like do better, here's what you did wrong, this, and this, but here's what you did on. And so from, I have my starting point.
For sure.
So,
and let's go into that. You mentioned that let's do better, do this. And that's a interesting thing that you mentioned because we're on the Personal Process podcast. We're all about trusting the process and getting to our success, but realizing that it's not as easy as just, posting a picture on Instagram with hashtag entrepreneur and getting there.
yeah.
But tell me about why it's like that for you. Like, why do you analyze it rather than saying, because, a lot of people when they fail, they're like, oh, I'm terrible. I suck. But it seems like you took it from a very mature stance and really just focused on your strength. Is there any advice you'd have for people on that?
I feel like it's just kind of something like the way, like I used to read a lot of books and stuff like that, especially a lot of military books, like a lot of like the special operations teams, they'll sit here and say, okay, like here's what we did good. Here's what was absolutely terrible. And it's still something I kind of try to do with my partner. It's like, if we're going to if we're going on like a cardiac arrest or like a bad wreck, I say, okay, hey, like, here's what we're going to do when we get out. Here's what I want done in the first 5 minutes. And after the call, we'll sit in the back. I shut my computer off. We just sit there as friends because he's one of my closest friends and say, okay, hey, like, here's what we both can do better on. Here's what you need to do better on. And here's what we did great on. And for next time, key points. And I feel like it just kind of sets you up for success for next time because, we had a call a few weeks ago and it was our first, kind of bad call together. I said, hey, next time, do this early on. Next time, I didn't have to say a word. He jumped on it. We were good to go. And I feel like
Man,
it just kind of sets a good tone.
huge, huge. And tell me about how you bring up feedback to, your partners in a professional environment, because a lot of people have a difficulty in that, especially I can't imagine how it's like in your job, it's critical care and like pressure's on, like it's life or death, life or death decisions.
I feel like it's the way you go about it. Like I tell people all the time, you can choose and this goes for anything in life. You can choose to be rude to people, or you can choose to sit here and be a good person, a teacher, and make it a learning experience. And my partner at my government job, he's in paramedic school, still trying to learn. Really smart kid, great kid.
Yeah.
And it's he's still learning. So it's like, okay, hey buddy, like I'm not gonna sit here and shoot you. Like, yeah, that was really bad, but let's learn this for next time.
Sure.
And at my hospital job, this guy's been doing this as long as I've been alive, 23 years in the ENT, and he's a good guy. But like even last night, I was like, hey, like everyone works differently, and I was like, hey man, like next time, like let's do this differently or stuff like that. And like it's good because it's not a condescending tone. I'm talking to you like a friend. I'm talking to you like a colleague. And at the end of the day, like this patient's life matters more than you being aggravated at me because I'm telling you how to do your job. And a lot of people don't have that. A lot of people can't shut their ego down enough to sit here and just like, thank you for giving me that. I appreciate it. So
That's huge. And I think we kind of, I guess, bounced off it. But I guess is the reason why you mention these things, even though obviously, if you criticize someone and you even want to help them through that criticism, you often become a target for them where they might not like you or they might, spread some rumors. Oh, that Joseph guy, he always complains about everything about me. I guess, what is the reason that you do this? Because it seems like you bring it up quite a lot for your colleagues and you want them to get better.
I mean, it's just like one. I mean, you're messing with patients' lives, and it's like at the end of the day, like if something happens to my mom or me, like I want the person that's going to come out to be competent, X, Y, and Z. I want them to be good to treat my family. And I feel like, sometimes like we all work different ways and we all don't see the bigger picture. And, you're messing with patients' lives and families' lives. But at the same time, like, I saw this in a Instagram post the other day and it was like, be an asset, not a liability. Be an asset to your company, be an asset to your partner in your community. Like at the end of the day, that's what matters. Like we had a situation a few weeks ago and someone, couldn't drop their ego because they had really messed up on a call. And it's like, hey, I'm not trying to be rude. this is somebody's life. This isn't a dummy. So,
Yep.
next time let's do this better. Because like this does matter. You're not messing with a dummy. You're not messing with a machine. Like this is somebody's loved one.
That's
And I feel like
huge.
that's one thing a lot of people forget.
Absolutely. And you were mentioning, like the ego's kind of staying in the way. Do you mind elaborating on that a little bit?
I feel like a lot of people, like, because especially in like the healthcare medicine business, like your name is everything. Like, you mentioned Joseph Green, and like what you just said a few minutes ago, people have an opinion, and that's completely fine. And a lot of people don't want someone, especially someone, when they've been doing this 10, 20 years, and I've been a medic for almost 3 years, coming in and saying, hey, buddy, do this better. It's like, oh, what do you know? It's like, well, you can all bring different aspects to the table because we all have different backgrounds. And I feel like sometimes people just let their ego and like, their hostility about someone coming at them get in their way of actually letting it be a learning experience.
That's so true. And I'm going to share this quick anecdote because I just had a flashback to like 5 years ago when I created this. But I feel like, Joseph, like the longer you're in a position, the more opportunities you have to say, imagine like the floor is filled with Legos, different colors, different shapes, all that kind of jazz. The longer you're there, the more opportunity you have to pick up certain pieces of Legos. But just because you're there longer doesn't mean that someone who's been there for a shorter period of time has the same Legos as you, and they may have different ones. And the different Legos are representing the different experiences, the different knowledge. And, like if someone's really into their job, they may be able to pick up more Legos than you per year because they're just really grinding at it.
Yep.
But that's a huge point that you just made. Like there's something that everyone can bring to the table. And I guess, how would you go about combating this, I guess, seniority level? Because especially in, I think, the healthcare field, there's a very big issue with that where, people who are seniors are like, don't talk to me. But it could literally be the difference between life and death, especially, like when I can't, I've volunteered a couple times as a volunteer medical first aid responder, just, going to learning some stuff and all that. And, like some people often get in the zone where, they're just tunnel vision, like they're doing CPR. And yeah, it's like, some people may even feel shocked to say like, hey, we got to stop. We got to, like do this. How do you go about that, man?
I mean, it's hard because like you're going to be the bad guy regardless. And this is the same situation I ran into a few weeks ago. Got tunnel vision and completely missed like the rest of the situation. And the guy was going to pass away ultimately at the end of the day. He was just too far in that kind of grave situation. But it was still like, if you get these interventions done early on, you may give them 3 or 4 more days with their family. Like, yeah, ultimately he's going to start coming to his injuries, but that's 3 or 4 more days with their loved one, and, we just got tunnel vision and, we failed to do the adequate things, and it's fine. Things happen like that, especially when you're stressed. And, like I told my partner last night, I have no problem being the bad guy because at the end of the day, like someone has to. And if it makes, that person, whoever, at the end of the day, like not make the same mistake again or be like, oh, hey, you know what? Like, yeah, I did bad on that call and you learn from it. Okay, then you improve. And that's all that matters. Because at the end of the day, like you should always want to be improving. And I have no problem with being the bad guy. Like I make that point all the time. Like you can dislike me, you can like me. I'm here to help people. That's what it is. Whether it be a patient or like, I had a coworker message me on Facebook the other day about like, he's like, hey, like I heard you're calling on that call. He's like, why'd you do this, this, and this? And we had like a 2-hour conversation over text just about why we did this. And he's kind of a newer medic and trying to, develop more of his skills. And it's like, you should always want to improve as a person, provider, and you should want to make people better too, especially your peers. Because those are the ones that like are going to be in the back with you on calls or are going to come help you on calls if you're in a jam.
Definitely. And Joseph, just by talking to you for this short period, it seems like you really kind of want to change your environment for the better, which is really inspirational to even hear and be with you right now and hear this. I guess one thing that I wanted to kind of follow up on, is talking about after certain situations happen, whether it's CPR or a case, and kind of decompressing after. What is that like? And I guess, from your experience being in such a high stress environment, having so many things to think about in an emergency situation, what about that process could be taken into other individuals' lives?
Um,
And why is it important, really?
that's a loaded question because I just kind of we were talking about this last night too. It was one of those things like it took me a while to like understand like okay, hey, like you can't go 24/7 or it's gonna end you. And because for
Mm,
so long, like I was He-Man. I was like, okay, nothing's gonna bother me, whatever. And we had a really bad call last year, and we were talking about it last night. I instead of sitting here taking like 15-30 minutes drinking a water, just sitting there by myself, went back in service and ran like the rest of the 24 hours. And we never went to talk to anybody, never did anything like that. And like that's bad for you. So like, after calls now, like me and my partner will we'll talk about it. We'll say, hey, like here's what could have been better. Are you good? Okay, I'm good. You know. And then now we have a little thing where like we'll go to lunch somewhere like down the road and we'll just sit there and like we'll talk about something other than that. Like my partner at my government job worked for the highway patrol for a few years. So like he'll tell stories about that or like we'll talk about just random things. And it's like do this stuff to make your mind get off of it, but also realize like it's always gonna be there and it's okay to it's okay for it to be there. Don't try to push it away. Like recognize it's there and recognize, okay, what do I need to do to get rid of this? And then do it. So
right. So to get rid of it, I guess beyond just talking to your peers, like what else would you recommend? Would you say like working out? Would you say meditating? Like what's your real jam?
um everything I mean everyone does things differently. I try to work out or I like to go on hikes here, especially living in Tennessee. We have a ton of beautiful hiking trails. Everyone's different and there's positive ways to get rid of it and there's also negative ways to get rid of it. And that's one thing that I feel like a lot of people, oh well, I'm not thinking about it. Well, yeah, you're drinking a whole thing of Jack Daniels every night to forget about it, and that's not okay. And we've all
Let's
been there.
sure. Let's talk about that. Like, that's a topic that we actually discussed before on this show. And I just want to know your perspective, like, why is it important to not have these negative things? Because, a person could be like, oh, I'm just having not even a bottle, I'm just having a couple of drinks and I just three or four, or I'm just watching TV for 8 hours straight. Why is that a negative thing, Joseph?
Um, the drinking aspect, it's like because like two or three adds up to 6, 8, then 10, 12. And then you're coming to work hungover, coming to work drunk, and that's not okay. The whole
Sure.
TV thing, like my dad did it that way. My dad worked a bunch, and he would come home and watch TV the rest of the night. But it's like the TV thing for me is you're not being present with your family, and when you're home, you should be with your family because at the end of the day, that's who has your back.
Definitely.
Like I have a great mom, I have a great girlfriend, both great support systems. Um, it's not in even if the person you're with is not in the field you're in, it's okay to still like they still want to hear about your day. Don't think because they're not some firefighter, paramedic, whatever. Like if they care about you, they want to hear about your day and know you're okay. And versus like staying in your TV, staying in your Xbox, like talk to your family, talk to your loved ones, like go work out, go do something with your kids because like sitting here and like being in your bubble doesn't fix anything.
Absolutely. And even beyond that, I think it's just you're kind of just trying to push that pain away. Like you're using the television as like I guess the source to just numb the pain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess like sometimes like if you just don't have that support system, I think that's okay. Well, with certain things. I think television
Yeah.
once in a while, other things, substance abuse and all that. Try your best not to get into that. But like that support system aspect, that's a very critical part. And, in the age of social media and phones and internet and all that kind of jazz, that's gone away. So I guess just from your experience, Joseph, what does social support mean for you? What does it look like? And I guess what would you recommend for people to have? And why is it important for people to have?
Um, I never really appreciated it. I kind of got to like a very bad mental state last year, and I pushed everybody away. Like 2 years, me and my girlfriend will be together. She's great, and I was always like, I'm okay, I'm okay. You don't understand what I'm feeling. I'm okay. and we work for the same place. So it's not like she's not in the field, doesn't get it. But, you know, it got to the point where she was like, and I get why she does it because everyone else says it. Okay, if he's not going to talk to me, I'm just not going to bother.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where I was like, okay, like, if you're not going to bother, I'm not going to be here anymore. Like, if you don't care. And at this, like, you know, I had to step back, and I got COVID back in November.
Wow.
And, like,
sorry to
I
hear.
make a joke, but it's, you know, COVID was the best thing to happen to me because it saved my career and it saved my relationship. Because I said, okay, you know, it's not like she's not caring about me. You're not being present. You're not sitting here giving her what she needs. If she wants to be here for you, talk to her about what's going on. And if she doesn't understand it, you know, she doesn't understand it. And it took a while to sit here and like learn how to communicate with each other. She's not good with like mental health stuff, and that's fine, but at least she can be there. She knows how I feel. And I have like my friends to be there for mental health stuff. And, you know, with my mom, like, family's family, they'll always be here for you no matter what. But having a good support system, I mean, you need that, especially if you're going to be in this field. Like, you can't go at this alone, whether, you know, if you don't have family, okay, you know, if you don't have a significant other, that's fine too. But like, you know, I'm around my partner more than I am my family. You know, we work 24 on and 72 hours off. And I do that, you know, 2 times a week, 3 times a week. I'm with them more than I am my own family. Lean on them. You know, they're the ones you're going through everything with.
Definitely.
You know, a lot of people, there's a big stigma with mental health, especially in this field. Like, oh, you know, there's a stigma with mental health everywhere. And I think I put that in like the little show notes in the beginning. You know, it's okay to not be okay. And it's okay to sit here and say, hey, like, I need a break and I need to talk to somebody. Because, like, eventually it's going to come and get you. And it's going to be hard to get out of it. So
it's kind of like depth with interest, eh? Yeah. So let's talk about, you know, I want to kind of bring it back to when you weren't doing your best that 1 year ago. And then I want to go into mental health because especially at COVID, I mean, you've probably seen it firsthand. It's going down. So with that time when you weren't doing well and you were pushing people away, no, I'm fine, when you weren't really fine, I guess if you could just give some advice for people that before they go into that state, what would it be? Because, you know, once you go into these phases of life that aren't optimal and everything just feels chaotic, destructive, and I guess you just don't know what to do but push people away and be angry at life.
Yep.
You can't think rationally, but if you had someone to give you advice in that time that would have helped you there, what would it be?
One, be vulnerable. Even being a man, it's okay to sit here and, you know, be an emotional wreck some days. Contrary to popular belief, it's okay.
Yeah.
2, like, don't listen to what anybody else says, because, you know, some people can handle the worst calls with ease, and you know, like me, I don't get stressed out on calls. If you see me stressed on a call, it's a bad day for everybody. Like, I'm not one of these people that runs around. Like, I'm very calm headed. But, you know, some people, like, they don't let anything get to them, and that's fine. But, you know, I'm the person, like, I'm good on calls, but then if it's like last year, that call was just like not a good time for anybody, and it messed a lot of people up. And, you know, you need to recognize that, and you need to recognize your triggers. Sure. And that's one thing, like, right away, like, you know, in school, that was our first thing. Like, I'll never forget our instructor, you know, he talked about, like, figure out your triggers and know what makes you mad. Because, you know, whenever you get on a call, like, if you have a history of domestic violence, like, you can't punch that guy in the face. Like, you're going to be mad, but, like, you can't punch him in the face. You know, kids with parents, you know, or parents with kids. There we go. Kid calls are going to get to you, and recognize that and be like, okay, hey, I should probably go talk to somebody tomorrow morning. But yeah, just be vulnerable, you know, don't be afraid to say I'm not okay. And especially, you know, we ran into this issue last year, and even currently now, one of our administrations doesn't really support that stuff. They kind of frown on mental health stuff. And that's kind of not okay. You know, it's the old back in the day way of like, oh, you know, I'm strong, I'm tough. Well, it's like, yeah, you know, you're going to be tough for so long until it gets you. So.
Definitely. Man, that's really disheartening to hear. Yeah, mental health isn't a joke. It's not just a hoax or anything like that. It's real, and everyone goes through it at different phases. And yeah, man, sorry, that just caught me off guard right there. let's talk about mental health just in general. And I guess, I think being a paramedic, obviously, I'm not a paramedic myself, but I can assume that not all your calls are CPR related, and there's a decent chunk that are mental health. Do you mind just sharing some experiences in general that you've looked at, and because of that, you've seen a change in, I guess, your experience of what mental health looks like and why it's important?
When you say change, like, what do you mean? Like
So
how it's gotten better or worse, or?
that, and in addition to that, like your perspective and your knowledge on it, and I guess, yeah, just something that the average individual wouldn't see.
Um, I mean, like what you said, 110%. Most of our calls are not cardiac arrest and really bad fires and wrecks. Like a good 98% of our calls are like, grandma fell at home or just like, hey, I don't feel good. Especially when COVID happened, everybody was like, oh, I have COVID. It's like, okay, it's like having the flu. You're supposed to feel this bad. Um, and the other part's like mental health calls, and it's kind of sad living in Tennessee, well, the South in general, because everyone has that, that thought of, okay, mental health is just, it's a joke, whatever. Um, so it's to Tennessee, I think, on the list 49th on like list of mental health funding for the entire United States.
Wow.
So, where I am, we have one public mental health hospital. We have a huge homeless population. So
Right.
they can only go to that, one facility. So it's like, I'll take this person in the ER because they want to commit suicide or, make a threat against somebody else. They wait about a week to go to the mental hospital, a week sitting in the ER by themselves when they should be in a mental health facility. And then they'll go to the mental health facility for about 2 or 3 days and then get put on a bunch of meds. And then because they're homeless, they don't get them filled. So, hey, revolve the circle. We're right back here in about a week. And there's that other half of the population that's, working class, has insurance, stuff like that. A lot of schools aren't popping out enough therapists, psychologists nowadays just because there's not a lot of money in it. So you get these people that are straight out of school and are just super like, oh, I don't care. Here's your Zoloft. Have a good day. And that's bad, because like medicine's one of those things. Like I tell everybody, like go do therapy. Therapy was one of the best things I ever did because like it made me okay. Like be vulnerable. It's okay, whatever. Medicine, like it just takes so long to sit here and get on a good regimen. It's like taking blood pressure medicine. Not everything works for everybody. So it's like, okay, with medicine, like it's gonna get really bad. Like you're gonna take something and it's gonna send you in the deepest deep you ever felt. And then
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna take something and it feels good, but you have this other side effect and you can't be on it anymore. So
Right.
I feel like I kind of just went off on a tangent. I'm trying to think
No,
of
no,
where
no. No, that's good. I mean, let's continue on the whole point about, I guess what you think medicine should be like, because what it sounds like to me is it should focus a lot more on communication.
Oh yeah, because I mean, you get a bunch of, um, like we'll have a, being in the South, a lot of people are like, okay, yeah, I take a sugar pill or I take a water pill, and it's like, okay, well, like, why do you take this sugar pill? Why do you take this water pill? And they can't answer your questions. And we had a really sick guy a few days ago. I was like, what do you take? He's like, oh, I take this, this, and this, and this. And I was like, why do you take this water pill? He's like, I don't know. I was like, do you have heart failure? And he's like, no. He's like, I have water on my heart. And I'm like, okay, like that's heart failure. And I feel like a lot of, medicine is very like time in, time out centered, especially now with the way like Medicare is. It's okay. Like the more patients I can see, the more I get paid. So,
Right.
like I'm going to give grandpa his Lasix, go to the next room, discharge him, and that's fine. But you need to explain like why you're taking this pill, why, what this condition is, what this condition can lead to if you don't take this pill. And that would cut down on probably about, half of the recurrent ER visits, half of the recurrent ambulance calls because people are understanding their care and their family can take better care of them because they understand it.
I'm just gonna keep clapping, man. That's huge. And Joseph, we have a similar system for, I believe, general practitioners, family doctors in Canada, where well, I think there's two different streams, but one of the streams, and it's most popular one, is you get paid per patient for obviously different rates depending on what you do, but there's an incentive only to see them for 5 minutes. And what are you going to do? Are you going to take 30 minutes and spend it with one patient, or see 6 patients, make, I don't know, triple, whatever the rate is money. And the point that you mentioned about the recurrent visits, wow, that's it, man. And it's a recurrent cycle, and that's so much cost. That's so much cost, not only financially, but to an individual, that poor individual who's suffering from mental health or even physical conditions that are just being, hey, have a pill. Hey, have a pill. And it's honestly a disservice. Like, why is it like this? I guess, man, that got me too emotional. Joseph, tell me what you think should happen. So I guess we could go into this phase of more communication and holistic medicine to break the cycle and not only make it cheaper for medicine, but make it better.
Yeah. If you want to ever like restructure something, you got to start from the bottom up, 110%. You look at businesses, anything, bottom up always. I feel like a lot of people just kind of like go into medicine and like, oh, I'm gonna go be a surgeon. I'm gonna go make all this money. That's fine and dandy because you're gonna have a good life, my friend. Excellent life. But at the same time, like they have the personality of a cactus. It's like
there are some cool surgeons.
Extremely. And there's some times where like I'll bring a patient in the ER and they're just like, hey buddy, what's going on, blah blah blah. And they're like, okay, well this is what I'm gonna do to you, and they go out the room and it's like, well, you just told this guy you're gonna cut his chest open and do X, Y, and Z to him. Like, how about we like spend a little time with him, do some hand patting, and then we can go out. Like I feel like part of like whenever you go to medical school, PA school, whatever you want to do is like learn how to talk to your patient. Like have someone that's like a therapist, counselor go in here and say, hey, like here's how we talk to people that are sick. Here's how we talk to people with end of life stuff. And especially end of life, like that was one thing they never taught in school. And that first conversation that you ever have with somebody, like, hey, your loved one's gone, stressful. Because like you're just telling them, hey, the person I just spent the last 60 years with is gone. And that's something they really like need more emphasis on communication, but those are the important talks.
For sure.
Just like a top down with everything, just have a communication class. Say, hey, like have someone come in that's a professional speaker, whatever, and just say, hey, most of the medical schools now are doing kind of like group classes, and have one of your blocks should be patient-centered communication, and you do role playing with you and your peer about, hey, such and such, what's going on today, and you just act out an entire thing, because like you're not going to know how to do that until you're in your like third, fourth year of medical school. And then it's like, you've been modeled the past 2 years to study. I haven't hung out with anybody in 2 years. How do you talk to somebody?
Definitely.
So, and I feel like we're bad about it too, especially like both the EMT schools aren't that stressful. Paramedic school, you have to get like such amount of intubation, such amount of like this, and this. And like, they never really talk about how to talk to people. And,
right.
A lot of people, we're all bad about it. I'm not saying I'm perfect. I have my flaws, 110% when it comes to communication. But, you should want your patient to feel comfortable with you. And you need that rapport and you need that trust. And two, like I said earlier, like if we just sit here and talk to people, the system wouldn't be as taxed as it is for like Canada and America. My mom, she has family up in Toronto. And, her cousin Doug always talks all the time about like the system up there and the healthcare. And it's like, it's crazy, man.
For sure. And let's talk about, because you mentioned tax. So let's talk about the financial aspect of it. Because, Joseph, I could imagine that we could have the best communication program with the best psychologist. And, at the end of the day, like med school is expensive. So is, any type of schooling. And when you have an opportunity to make 6 times your income by seeing 7 patients rather than spending the same time with one patient, I feel like, debt talks, man. Like people have to get rid of their debt, and for some it might not even be a debt, but they just want to drive a Lambo or whatever. I guess what could we do on that front? Who would we target? Should allied health? Should paramedics? Should physician assistants? Should doctors all come together and fight this? And even if they do, there's going to be opposition in all those fields because you're potentially losing the money. So I guess how would you go about that from targeting it at a systems level and, from a financial aspect? Deep question, by the way.
Oh yeah, no, you're good. I like the deep questions. I mean, it's one of those hard things to do because, especially in America, you have like JCO, like the hospital administration. You have Medicare. You have, in Tennessee, we have TennCare, so like a state level, Medicare. So you have all these big branches of stuff, and you have to sit here and tell all of them, we are doing this terrible. Here's what we're going to do. And like you just said, there are always going to be opposition, but there's more of them than more of us. And, you have to have so many people on board with changing thing, and change takes a while, but at the same time, like a lot of people are comfortable with the way things are. I mean, because like you said, they get to drive their Lambo, they get to see 6 patients a day, and they get to go home at 5 o'clock and have dinner with whoever, go have drinks with whoever, and go play golf, and that's fine. But you can get a lot done in like 5 to 15 minutes with your patient just by like being an effective communicator. So it's also like, yeah, like, this is a terrible situation, but also like make time with what you have, or make do with what you have. Like, because I mean, especially like I worked downtown in the city for about a year, 2 years, and the transports are super short, and I can, what's going on, how long it's been like this, whatever, in 5 minutes going to the hospital, have an entire story with someone that's probably not the best talker. A lot of people in these hospitals, like, orthopedics, grandma probably fell and broke her hip. Okay, hey, like, here's the plan. Here's your after plan. Here's your PT plan. I'll see you in 6 weeks. Bye. And that way they're aware of their care. They're aware after the fact, hey, like, if I'm hurting my hip, I don't need to call 911 because it's just pain and I can take my hydrocodones. And it's, it just comes back to being a good communicator and being a good patient advocate. And that's one thing I drill with my partner all the time. Like, your patient really doesn't have that much of a voice most of the time. So like, be that patient advocate, because you're the one, especially in this field, that gets them the care they need.
Huge. And, just talking about the patient advocacy, like being a paramedic, you're one of the first people that deals with such an intimate part of a patient's life. And honestly, like, imagine someone broke their hip. Well, you don't have to imagine, you've probably seen it firsthand. But, like, and then you're taking them to the hospital, and the difference between someone who communicates to them and actually cares and listens to their story and how they're feeling, and even if it's random stuff that they're saying, it makes them feel comfortable. And then that could be the difference between them calling the next time when they have like maybe a mental health problem. And who knows, like, just that one piece of communication that you had with them, Joseph, it could save a life. It could change a life. And one thing that I try to push on this podcast is like, it's not only that one person that you're doing it to. That one person may do it to their network, and then your effect is not 1-to-1, it's exponential. And it grows. So yeah, just huge points. And yeah, I mean, is there anything else that you wanted to say here? I kind of want to switch gears to talk about your kind of story and going to the different places with paramedicine.
Yeah, we can switch gears. There's really not much I can say. Not much else I can say other than just be a good patient advocate. And also know your resources in your area. Having a big homeless population, there's a ton of mental health resources. I keep those numbers in my phone because, hey, like, not to divert them from calling 911, because that's what we're here for. But hey, like, instead of getting this like $2,000 like ambulance bill and the $5,000 a year bill you're about to get, call this crisis line. They'll have a crisis worker come out, they'll have a cop come out, and they'll help you more than I can, and they can, because I'm gonna put you on my stretcher. We're gonna take a ride to the hospital, and you're gonna sit in a bed for a week until the mental health hospital opens up. They're gonna take another ambulance ride, and then you're just in the same position you were. And then, oh yeah, you'll probably come back to the homeless kitchen, and your stuff will probably be gone, and then that's more stress.
Right. Yeah. So again, back to that communication and education. That's something that I feel like is really lacking in just everywhere, man. It's like we don't know what resources are available, and I feel like there needs to be some sort of collaboration with these government level, the health level, everyone, like you mentioned, the ground up to the top down. And, because there is a financial aspect. I mean, let's talk about that money, like that hospital ride, all that gas. And not only that, but like maybe because of seeing them, there's a case that you're unable to see and that person dies. And I mean, these are things that happen. And if there was a way to have everyone know about these resources, maybe there's like a phone in the middle of the homeless area where individuals could just press a button and then have someone come down, make it more well known, more advertising. Crazy. Awesome, man. That was a really good segment. Let's crank it down to drive, and we're gonna shoot forward. And I want to talk about your experience in paramedicine because you've gone through a couple different fields. Do you mind just kind of giving us a little background on that?
Yeah. So like I said earlier in the podcast, I started out at a little volunteer fire department in kind of a rural, kind of city community. Part of it was city and the rest was pretty rural. You know, you would go to a house fire, you'd have like a 20-25 minute response time sometimes, depending on where it is in the area. And, you know, like you have to get very comfortable with being uncomfortable because, you know, you can have this really sick patient and your ambulance is coming from the other side of the county 30 minutes away. So it's like, hey, man, like, get ready because it's about to go down in here. But, you know, I worked after I got my advanced in December of 16. I started working on the ambulance in March of 17. And I worked for a private service that did a mix. They did like interfacility, so like taking someone from the hospital to the nursing home for rehab, or nursing home to the hospital to being admitted, stuff like that. And they also did 911 in 5 counties, but they were mainly rural counties. I stayed on like the they call it IFT, so like interfacility transfer. I stayed on that truck until I finished paramedic school in August of 18. So from March until August of 18, I was just doing transfers all the time. You know, you learn how to talk to people, and that's another thing. Like, you know, especially for any EMT that's listening, like that's the best experience you'll ever have. Like 911 is so cool and so fun, but like learning how to talk to your patient, learning how to take a basic set of bottles, like that's the bread and butter of this job, and like that's where you learn the most. So like, you know, did that experience suck sometimes? Yeah, at 3 a.m., you know, taking someone to the nursing home probably was not on my list to do at 3 a.m., but it is what it is. That's the job you signed up for. So yeah, like that's the best experience you'll probably ever have. So make good use of it. I got my paramedic in August of 18, got sent up to a rural town in Tennessee called Whitwell, Tennessee. I probably shouldn't have said that, but oh well. And it was extremely rural. And the company, I still worked for the private service, so they had a county south. They had the county I worked in, and they had a county up above. So there was a straight shot up the highway to go to these 3 counties. And you know, it wasn't uncommon to be the only ambulance in those 3 counties because we, you know, everywhere was like they kept 2 down here, they kept 2 here, and they kept 2 up there. But the one farthest north of us had a hospital there. So you know, if that first truck goes on a transfer down to the main hospital, they're gone for 2 hours right out of the gate. That truck, the only truck in that county, goes on an 911 call. Okay, well, they have no trucks. So then, you know, you go to that county line, and the county that was way far down south was kind of busy for being such a rural area. And it wasn't uncommon. Both trucks go out at the same time. Okay, you just lost 2 trucks. So now you have your other truck that's farther, that's kind of near the South County line, goes to stage in that county. They get a call. So you have 1 ambulance in 3 counties. And, you know, there were some times where it's like you had an hour response to a call. And, you know, and plus like, and 2-hour transports to the hospital. You know, if you get in a bad jam, like you have helicopters, like if you have a really bad call a helicopter. But, you know, helicopters only have so much leeway, especially the weather. So, you know, you may have a really sick patient. You want to fly, a stroke, heart attack, whatever. Oh, we can't fly. Sorry. That's your patient now for 2 hours. And, you know,
Yeah.
I've been doing this like a very short amount of time, obviously, but like I tell people all the time, like being a rural paramedic, like maybe the most like uncomfortable, like being comfortable being uncomfortable because you had such sick patients and like you got to see your treatments work. But it's also like, okay, a 30-minute transport to the hospital, the sick guy, okay, nothing. Like that's fine. I'm used to an hour and a half, 2 hours. And a lot of people I say, oh yeah, I've been doing this for 3 years. What? Yeah, because you know I worked for 6 months somewhere where like you had no fire department, you had no help. It was you and your partner, and normally I had an EMT basic, so it was really just me because he really can't do much in the back of the ambulance, which is fine. So it makes you grow a lot, and I tell everybody like, you know, work rural medicine for a little bit, like, even if it's just part time, 1 shift a week, you'll grow so much. At that time, I was working for the county service I do now, just part time. I was working downtown. You know, you're 5 minutes from the hospital. You get a ton of like gunshots, stabbings, like, you know, the bread and the butter why people do this.
Yeah.
It was fun, but the rural side was more. I liked it a lot more because you're farther out. You get to see your treatments actually work, and you get to do medicine. That's why
Hmm.
people signed up to do this, not to just take 5-minute rides to the hospital for your entire 24 hours.
Yeah.
Um, and then I left the private service in November of 18, just because I had a better opportunity at the hospital I'm at now, and
Mhm.
worked in when I moved to Tennessee. I got to work in the community that I grew up in when I first moved here.
Nice.
And that was weird because, I went to high school with all these people. When I went to high school, this kid and their family. And it was fun because it was like, okay, like I'm working in the city that kind of made Joseph Joseph. So it was
Yeah.
very surreal, very nice, but it's also like, oh, dude, we played football together. I'm going to his funeral tomorrow. So at that aspect,
Yeah.
it's different.
How does it feel?
Um, it's nice to sit here and be like the voice of the community you grew up in, because like the way it works in the place in the city I live now, it's on a 3-day rotation. So one day, one service will have it. The second day, one service will have it. And the third day, the hospital will have it. So, you get a different medic pretty much every rotation day, minus at the hospital. It was always me. So it was nice to work out there, but at the same time, like it's distressing to see somebody that you played football with, wrestled with, that like passed away from an overdose, or like
Yeah.
got in a really bad car wreck and now they're messed up because like I spent 4 years with this guy, now he's gone. Or like oh, that's such and such's mom. Oh well, I have to go now talk to their family member because their mom passed away. So like it had its ups and downs. Thoroughly, I enjoyed it. We have a great fire department out here, like some of the best guys I'll ever work with, honestly. Um, but it had its ups and downs. So
For sure. For sure. So, one question I have for you, Joseph, is since you've been in the private sector, the public sector, various forms of paramedicine and EMS, what is some things in your opinion that are, I guess, from whatever field you want, good to bring into different fields, whether it's more emphasis on communication, whether it's particular strategies, what could be taken from each to make an ultimate paramedicine, I guess, profession?
that's a great question. One is like obviously number one is always communication. It's always gonna be my number one. Because different structures have different. If you work for the private service, it's a company just like everything else is, just like GE. So you have your CEO, you have your president, and like they don't communicate that well always. So you kind of have to, there's a lot of times where like, hey buddy, we need this, this, and this. Okay, I'll get it to you next week. And that's where you learn to kind of be hard on people. No, like I need it now, or I'm not working on this ambulance because I don't even have enough drugs to run a CPR. So like,
Wow.
give me my stuff, please. And then working for the government, the government's good with you have pretty much unlimited funding for the most part, especially if they support you, which I'm beyond thankful. Like whenever COVID happened, like they gave us anything we needed, any PPE, like we were set. So governments, they have unlimited money, they have unlimited resources. You're in line with like the sheriff's department and the fire department, so like you have unlimited training opportunities. So like where I live, we have an airport, we have a minor league baseball team, we have a mall, we have so many things that can go wrong. So it's like there's so much time for training, but we
Yeah.
don't do it that much because everyone's so busy. So it's like every I think every 2 or 3 years you're supposed to have like a mass casualty like practice mock thing at the airport. Well, it doesn't happen that much because we're all so taxed and so busy nowadays. But it's like like that's one thing the private service did very well was, okay, like you go out in these communities, you have a bus wreck, you have a mock whatever, a mock hazmat incident, and like you train for it, because like when it's time to actually do that, and it's proven like if it's going to happen at some point. We had a major shooting back here in 2015 at our naval base. Then we had a big bus wreck the year after, and like tragically like 11 kids passed away. It was very bad bus wreck, but no one was prepared for that because no one trained for that. And
Hmm.
we all did very well on it. I wasn't working obviously, but like the people I work around, like it was ran well, but it was like no one expected that, and they hadn't drilled for that in so long. It's like, oh, what do we do? Like, what's this command structure we have now? So, just communication and like being, I guess, expect the unexpected. I know that sounds very cliche, but like, you can have a shift where it's like, you run no calls. Like a few shifts ago, and I worked for the hospital. It's a very rural town, and it was like 2 o'clock, no calls, and they had a 6-car pile up on the interstate. No one planned for that this morning. I'll tell you, I did not plan for that. But things happen, Murphy's Law. If something's going to happen, it's going to happen. So.
Absolutely. And I want to kind of revisit that private aspect that could benefit the public system. You're mentioning, they prepared more for like bigger events that are unlikely, but if they do happen eventually, and as you mentioned, Murphy's Law, it's bound to happen, people can be a little bit unprepared. What can the public system do, in your opinion, to better address this? Should there be more training days? Should there be more individuals working? Should there be certain days where, I don't know, take the wheel, man?
I just kind of feel like, a lot of people like have the mindset with everything that we do is, oh, that'll never happen. That'll never happen. We also have a nuclear plant in our area, and, we're
Wow.
yearly, we have a drill for that. They'll come in and they'll say, okay, hey, if you get a call here, here's what you do. If we have a disaster, here's what you do. So that's good. But that's probably like the only really yearly training thing we do for such a major disaster. But like, especially living in a city where like there's so much that can go wrong, there's so much that can be attacked, especially living this day and age, like, with the Boston bombings, stuff like that. Stuff can always go wrong, all the naval bases. Just shut the ego down and just prepare for stuff. I'm just a little, like someone told me before, you're just a truck medic, like keep your opinions to yourself. You're right, that's all I am. But like at the same time, like, you owe it to the people that are in your community to be prepared for situations like that.
Definitely. And just to speak on that point where individuals are saying like, oh, you're this position or you're that position. I think I was hearing the story about, I believe it was Cheetos. I may be wrong on this, but there was an individual who was a janitor. And again, don't quote me on this, but, and he was of, I believe Mexican descent. And, there was some sort of contest at the Cheetos factory, and they're saying, hey, whoever sends us a new opinion on a product, and if we use it, like we'll give them like a $10,000 bonus or whatever. And they'd expect it to come from like maybe not senior level, but maybe like mid level at the Cheetos factory. But this janitor sent in his request, and his request was, I believe it was Flamin' Hot Cheetos, because they wanted more spicy Cheetos, and that's how it got adopted. And it's like, you could just say that, oh, he's a janitor and he doesn't know anything, and I don't think that's fair, because everyone has a unique experience. And, like, because of that, I mean, I'm not sure about you, Joseph, but I'm a fan of those Flamin' Hot Cheetos. And, it's such a shame that this is how it is, because everyone has such unique insights. And, the insights that you have working the job is different than someone who's on the senior level. Like you're mentioning that, like, the boss was like, oh, like, yeah, give me 10 days, but you're like, we need the supplies, come on.
Mm-hmm.
And, you're doing so respectfully, but like, it's just a different point of view, different experiences. And going back to the Lego analogy, like, you've picked up some blocks, they've picked up some blocks, some of them are going to match, some of them aren't going to match. And putting it together, that's what makes that Lego masterpiece. That was a cool analogy. So, that's that's one thing. And I kind of wanted to push further. Like, what can we do to specifically get into the public system, these trainings? Like, what should we advocate for? Should there be certain policies?
I think it's just a leadership aspect. I feel like a lot of people, they get in leadership positions, and I work with some very great leaders, very great supervisors, and I work with some that are just like, buddy, like a monkey could do better than this, and it's the way leadership is. Some people are meant to be leaders, and some people are meant to just, some people get that position, they sit at a desk and they do nothing for their service and nothing for their people. And that's fine if you want to do that. Ride the desk for 20 years, buddy. It is what it is.
Yeah.
We had this conversation the other day with one of my peers. Until like like I said earlier, you can change stuff from the bottom down, but only if it's going to be received well by the people you're trying to change. And a lot of the issue is, you have a lot of these, like, with all due respect, all these old heads that have been doing this as long as, me, whoever been alive. And that's the way they're ingrained in their brain is, oh, we don't need that. So until you have people that are, like, willing to do change, willing to improve on stuff, and willing to just listen, it's going to be hard, like where I live at, we're blessed. We have so many different entities for everything, especially emergency management. Our 911 center has like a little emergency operations center in the basement. We have an Ironman here every year. We have like the full on Ironman. So like it opens up for that. We have a bunch of big music festivals here. So it's like we're blessed with all these like good services, good things that we have, but we don't use them to our abilities. We have a good emergency management section where like, one dude was just good staff, good leadership over there. And it's like, we can learn a lot from everybody, but we choose not to because, we're EMS, we do our own thing. We're better than people. And it's like, no, like we should all be trained together. At my old station, I was up the road from one of the city fire department. And, I could see their station from my bedroom window almost. And, we went there one day to have dinner and, good dinner and stuff. We were talking about, hey guys, like, I don't know y'all from Adam and Eve. Like, can we come up here one day and just sit here? I'm like, even if it's like, y'all are just doing like firefighting stuff, like catching a hydrant, doing whatever. Can we just come up here and sit with y'all, maybe even play around and like see how y'all do things? Because like, if we get out on a house fire and like, especially once COVID happened, like a lot of people got sick. So like, you probably have 2 or 3 people on an engine. Like if they get to a house fire, they're useless. They can't go in because of the way the rules are. So like, hey, like I'll help you catch this hydrant. I'll handle this until the next person gets here and help y'all out. And that's how it should be. You should be wanting to help your fellow man.
Yeah.
So.
That's huge. And you had a lot of good points there. I'm going to dive deep into it. You're mentioning that some of the individuals who are older, they've picked up their fair share of Legos, but maybe they haven't picked up the recent Legos that you have, right? And this is actually an interesting point, because the casual, I think, saying for individuals who are older is like, you don't know much, you don't know anything, I've been here for longer. But being young, like that brings a set of skills that older people aren't likely to have. For example, how to utilize social media to more effectively message, how to utilize social media to do better advertising. For example, the homeless population we were talking about, or just anything really, like it could be having that on ground perspective, or having a better understanding of the mental health problems that people our age are having, and that's one thing that I think a lot of fields need to take into account. At the senior level, like there needs to be a younger individual in there to voice these concerns and treat it with respect, because that's the advocate for the people on the ground. And if we don't have that, I mean, like, what's the word? It's kind of like, I don't even know how to. It's kind of like throwing a dart without having a target.
Yeah, exactly.
The young person's saying like, "Hey, here's the board. You throw your dart here." But if you don't have that, you're just shooting. And yeah, sometimes you're gonna hit, but I think for most of it, you're gonna miss it. And even if you hit it, it might not be on the bullseye that the young individual could give you. And yeah, I'm not sure if you wanted to comment on that or if I should go on to the second part.
No, I feel like you're 100% right. Like especially with the Lego thing and the dartboard, like everyone brings different experiences, especially when like, there's a bunch of people I work with that like were prior military, prior law enforcement, prior this. And we all have all these different things and everyone does things in a better way. Like, fire departments are great at organizing, great at structure, great at this. Police departments are just great at just getting things done. Like in general, like if you want something done, hey buddy, can you come do this for me? And you'll get it done. And like EMS, with all due respect from what I've seen, like there's some great services out there that are genuinely like cream of the crop, like good to go. And they're doing great things. And it's so good to see that because they have such a good leadership structure and like such a good medical direction. Like they're doing good things for their citizens. And EMS is one of those things, like I said earlier, with like you have an older population. Oh, well, we've always done it this way. And that's fine. But like if you're not improving, you're not doing anything. If you're not changing, you're not doing anything. So
Definitely. And, that kind of leads to the second question. You're mentioning that each segment of medicine has something to offer. That's so important because, like you mentioned, there's certain things that a firefighter would do better than someone who's a paramedic. And it's not to say that one is better than the other. It's just people have certain blocks that you get from the job. You're more likely to get certain things. For example, I'd reckon that on average, a paramedic has better communication skills than a firefighter on average, because a firefighter has to go guns blazing into a house to save someone. Whereas a paramedic, there's so much more room for communication. There's so much more benefit that communication can serve. And, there should be some sort of events where these individuals could even just meet up and have some sort of social event to get to know each other, because even through casual conversation, that could make the difference. And then, oh, the firefighter just brings up, oh, by the way, yeah, if there's a fire here, you take that nugget, and then if it happens, execute. And that might be the difference between you saving a life or not. Yeah, I'm not sure. What do you think of that?
I agree with that 110%. I'll go back to the call back in March. It was a house fire, it was like March the 10th last year. I'll never forget the day. Sunny day, beautiful day. We just walked out of the grocery thing. I was like, I'm gonna go work out whenever we get back, And they're like, medic 15, stand by for a house fire with entrapment. I was like, that's weird. And the street it was on was a very like residential street, beautiful houses. And like literally we pulled around the corner and like there's 3 fire engines and you see the flames from the beginning of the street. And I'm like,
wow,
oh, this isn't good. Mom had left to go out somewhere, and she forgot to tell the older brother the little brother was in the house. And older brother ran outside. He called mom. Mom was like, oh no, such and such is still in there. So, he would do what anybody would do and run back in for his brother. He got pulled out, fire department, and working in that area, you get to know all your firefighters very well, your cops very well. And I'm in the back with older brother, and I hear mayday, 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 and that's like okay, hey, like something's wrong, I need help. And like I looked at the truck, and like, everyone was freaking out. Like I know all the guys on that truck, like some of the closest friends, and I was like, oh, like who's it gonna be? X, Y, Z, whatever. I'm the only truck on scene. Like I'm trying to like get supervisors, get trucks, whatever. I'm trying to see this patient, see that patient. I'm like, where's my next truck at? They're like 10 minutes away. I'm like, oh, this ain't good. Then they pull the kid out.
right?
And all, it's weird because all you can kind of think about was like my buddy inside, stuff like that. They pull the kid out, get him in the back. What happened is what happened. But after the fact, like I went to the fire station that pulled that kid out. I was like, hey man, like good job. Like, I don't care what anybody says, good job. And he teared up. I'm like, what's wrong? He's like, no one, obviously like administration was like, hey man, good job, good save. But he's like, no one of like from you has come and said, hey, like good job. Like, buddy, like that's why we do this, is to like make that difference. And it's like that you should be more in tune with your peers, because at the end of the day, like I said earlier, this is who you're gonna go, to there and back with. So
Yeah, that's huge. And just even to add on to that, like it seems like you brought in a little bit of the culture from paramedicine to the firefighting scene, and maybe in their current culture they didn't have that, like, hey, good job. And it's more like that tough macho kind of do your job and then just get on with your day. If you have struggles, get over it. And that it's an interesting point that you made, because this kind of opens up the door for a lot of things. And this is why I think communication and collaborating with so many different individuals, whether you agree with their perspective or not, is so vital, because this is one point of paramedicine, right? And that firefighter might not agree with everything, and that's why he chose firefighting instead of paramedicine. But this is maybe one thing that is like, maybe this is something that's good to incorporate into my routine that I could give to my colleagues after a huge fight, or not a fight, a fire. Obviously stressful times.
Oh, yeah.
And like it's a shame, because I think especially in the States, like there's a lot of divisions between like political factions, XYZ, and it seems like it's a constant clash. It's not, like, hey, like I believe in this, because in Canada it's a lot, for the most part, I'd say it's a lot more, I guess, easy. But in the States, it's like fighting, like, oh, you're the worst person if you do this, you're the worst person. It's like, you're not going to get anywhere like that, by having these conversations. Just one small interaction like that, you made such a visceral response for that individual, right? And again, it's that network effect. You could have changed so many lives through that one action, Joseph.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah, so I think I'm gonna change gears again. Go into, I don't know, what are we on? Let's go to gear 4, manual cars. I have no idea how to drive a manual, so hopefully that makes
Me
sense.
either.
Okay, awesome. So I'm probably gonna get roasted if I'm wrong, but let's change gears to your project that you're working on right now, Joseph, and kind of like a backstory and why it's important to you.
Yeah, so back in there was a guy I worked with at my government job. Came to me and well, it didn't really come to me. He likes a page like me on Facebook, and it was like progressive medics, progressive paramedics. And I was like, huh, that's interesting. And 5 people have liked it. I'm trying to narrow it down of who had made that, and I'm like, not him, definitely not him. Okay, I think it's him. I
Right.
messaged him. I was like, hey, buddy, like, is this your website? Because I had started an Instagram probably about a year ago, and have a lot of these people who like they'll make Instagram posts, make Facebook posts that are educational, like, hey, like, they'll do a topic and they'll drill it and they'll put it on Instagram, and it's good, and it's something I wanted to do because like I'm a big believer in like education and training. I taught EMT classes, not taught. I helped out the EMT classes for a little bit. I was a preceptor for students for a little bit, so like, I believe in that education and training aspect is very important. I said, hey, buddy, like, is this your website? He's like, yeah, man, I'm trying to get off the ground. Did you want to write? I'm like, I love writing. That's another thing I do too is like in high school when I was stressed, I would just write something, write my frustrations, throw it away. I was like, yeah, man, especially it's an educational page, whatever. And he had put like a mental health thing on there with like resources for first responders. And I was like, dude, I'm down with this 110%. Wrote the first article, he wrote one, and then news had kind of come about like the counties were going to go to a different provider for 911 services. And I had worked in one of those counties for a very short period of time, but like you get a bunch of like Georgia State Patrol will chase people into that county, and it'll just be like bad wrecks, just a lot of trauma in that county. And a lot of people get flown out to the main hospital. And he's like, how do you feel about blood? And I'm like, what do you mean blood? Like, I really rather not like look at it all the time, but yeah. Like, what do you mean? And he's like, no, putting blood on the ambulance. And I was like, oh, okay. I think a lot of people don't know, like, it's very rare to have an ambulance with blood on it. In Tennessee, you have Williamson County or Williamson Medical Center. They have it. You have like 3 or 4 different services in Texas and probably a few others throughout the United States. But that's it. It's mainly on helicopters. But, if the helicopter can't fly, that's it. And, a lot of, the way we kind of treat bleeding and shock is, you just pump them full of like normal saline, which is pretty much salt water. It's like, okay, well, if I'm bleeding and I'm shot, like, what benefit am I getting from putting the salt water in my body? Now you're just diluting everything to help you clot. You're diluting everything. You're decreasing your temperature. And there's a thing called the Lethal Triad. And it's like, if you don't clot, your temperature's low and you become acidotic, which is like the salt water, it makes you super acidic. That's it. Like, you're probably going to pass away from this.
Right.
And we were just like, yeah, man, like, this is a good idea. Let's do it. So we spent like August until we finished school, first part of December. So first part of December working on this PowerPoint, getting a ton of military research, civilian stuff. Like we would call a bunch of like EMS services in Texas, be like, hey, what do y'all do? How'd y'all get this started? And collaborate with a bunch of people and got a bunch of good ideas and talked to a bunch of very influential people. And it was like, even if it doesn't turn out good, I'm thankful for that experience because it was like, okay, hey, like, you tried to start something great that would help a ton of people. He's a super smart kid. He's actually one of our supervisors now at the hospital service, like very bright kid. Thankful to call him a friend and a colleague. Super good guy.
Yeah.
Right now we're just waiting on, like, we have to meet with our medical director. She has to approve it. And we go to the state because the state of Georgia, it's a pilot program right now. So the state has to approve it and they have to oversee it. But other than that, I think it's a really good thing. I think it'll help a lot of lives. Even outside of trauma, you have someone that's bleeding in their intestines, like blood helps.
Yeah.
So, and we're kind of doing a little special thing. So like, there's a big shortage of O negative blood. So it's like, it's very hard to sit here and get, there's such a big shortage. So the military did a thing where they have O positive blood. and they tested for titers. So the titers are like anti-B and anti-A. So it's like, okay, if you have low titers, I can give this O positive blood to anybody, and they probably will not have a reaction. And a special operations unit in the Army did that for a few years, and it worked out great because like they were having a big shortage of O negative blood overseas. A lot of troops were passing away. They're like, well, hey, let's try this idea, and it worked, and it's great. And that's kind of what we put our emphasis on is like, okay, we know we're not going to get O negative blood from the blood bank because we're not a trauma center. So let's try to do this. And working with the hospital, you know, you have a blood bank there, but they're still not going to give O negative. So it was a big thing of like logistics, you know, coolers, warmers, everything like that. Where are you going to get the blood from? Because the main blood bank in the city is probably not going to give you, you know, such and such units of O positive blood. So it was a really good project for us both. It helped me a lot mentally because I had something to like work on, stuff like that. But it was also good because it's like, if this goes through, like this is going to change so many people's lives.
Definitely.
And at the end of the day, like that's what matters. And you should always want to do that for your people and your patients. And especially if you live in that community, that's huge.
Huge. Absolutely, man. And just to give some information for those who aren't too medically involved, O negative blood is a universal donor, essentially meaning that they can pop that blood into anyone and they'd get accepted. And this O positive thing that you're telling me about, Joseph, that's something that I didn't even know about. That's pretty cool.
It's pretty rare too. So
yeah. No, that's some knowledge that you just dropped on me. That's awesome. But you know, like you're mentioning the fact that even if it doesn't work out, like it's a positive, and you were also mentioning the fact that it gave me something else to do, and you know, that was good for my mental health and all that kind of jazz. So that's what man, let me go back. So that gives me a segue to one thing that I was watching on YouTube the other day, and it was mentioning that, you know, like when you only have one thing that you're working on, if that fails, you're crushed.
yeah.
But if you have a lot of other things to work on, for example, a relationship, I don't know, a hobby, meeting up with your friends, or even projects like this that can potentially change the world or change the nation, you know, even if you have a tough day, like it's like, man, you know, I'm still making a big difference here, and that's okay. And we'll get to the mental health coping aspect. We'll talk about it, but like, let's work on this as well. And that's a huge point. I mean, let's talk about the aspect of even if it fails, it's still a good experience. Do you mind diving into that portion a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think like for me, because just the way me and him are, we're very like, we want progressive things for EMS medicine, especially in this area. Even if this fails, okay, we have 4 other projects we want to start on, you know, or 3 or 4, kind of under the table still. But you know, it starts something. Like if you, it's kind of like going to the gym. Like if I'm not the most in shape person, so you know, I'm like, okay, let's start going to the gym. Like you don't need motivation to start, you need discipline. So it's like, okay, I started this project, I finished it, number 2, number 3, number 4. And it was something good for both of us because like we're both very young, and it was something like, okay, like we have the brain power, like we have everything, you just need more people on board. But yeah.
Yeah. That's huge, man. And you know, it's like even if it fails, you know, this is kind of the whole purpose of this, man. Like look at the whole background we have. It's steps, right? It's steps. And sometimes you finish a step and you get to a level plane, and that could be a potential stoppage point for people, or they could keep going. And you know, the lessons that you've learned in each single project of your life adds up. You know, those steps don't go away. Yeah, you can go down the steps if you do things such as the negative coping mechanisms like drinking and, you know, just not caring about your mental health. But those steps all add up. The experiences that you learn, the communication skills that you've learned, the business side of it, how to pitch an idea, and, you know, all of that comes. And then, like, before you know it, like, if you start a new project or even if this one continues, all these steps, man, it's just like major, 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 major keys. Um, yeah. So I think Joseph, I think that's a good podcast right there, my man. So I have 2 questions that I always ask my guests. And the first one is, what is your one message to the audience? And this message is something that you can pick whatever you like. It's very broad intentionally, so it could be something that we haven't talked about. It could be reiterating something that we talked about. And I want to give you the power to take that wherever you like. So please feel free.
I'll say this. you can do anything you put your mind to, 110%. You know, I was a kid that, like, we moved to Tennessee. We lived on pretty much $700 a month because my mom was disabled at the time. You know, we ate at the food bank once a week. You know, we had people, like, we didn't live in Section 8 housing, but we, you know, we had rent vouchers, we had electricity vouchers. And, like, I was someone that, like, really, like, probably should never been anything in his life. Like, really, like, most of the people's mindset, like, you should be working at McDonald's right now, because that's kind of the thing I grew up in. You know, I had a great support system. Going back to that, you know, my mom was like, hey, go do it, go do it, go do it. And I turned out to be something decent. So do anything you put your mind to. You know, it's going to suck. Like, you know, I was taking Ubers 2 times a day to and from class for a year. Really expensive, but I got it done. And at the end of the day, like, you know, when I have kids one day, hey, like, do your thing, man. Like, whatever you want to do, go do it. It's, you know, I'm not going to say it wasn't easy. Or it wasn't easy. There we go. It wasn't easy at all. Like, there was a lot of times, you know, like, I'd have breakdowns in the back of the Uber because, like, I had $5 in my bank account. But hey, like, I got it done. And that's all that matters. Especially, you know, if you have a family or whatever, like, yeah, it's going to suck having that time away from your kids, time away from your husband. But at the end of the day, like, at the end of your journey and the end of your steps, like, you're going to have a better life. So just, you know, do what makes you happy and do what you want to do. Even if it's going to suck for a few years, okay, well, hey, at least you did it. You know, good for you. Because a lot of people don't have that drive and, like, that mental stability to sit here and say, I'm cool with being uncomfortable for the next year because it's going to give me a better life. They'd say, I'm just going to stay where I'm at. Then in 2 years down the road, oh, I still hate where I'm at. Well, yeah, think about where you could have been now 2 years ago.
Definitely. And, you know, it comes back to trust in your own personal process. Trust the steps that you've taken. And even though the top of the floor seems far away, every single steps takes you there. And, you know, just on that note, just a quick analogy. I think Joe Rogan was mentioning that, you know, imagine yourself like you're being filmed and you're in a movie. And right now you're at the part where it sucks. And there's like one of those superhero movies where, you know, like you go from the suck to the amazing and you have a film crew following you. Like, what would you do now? And I think that's the message that I want to kind of leave the audience on. And I think that's kind of the message that this podcast was really about. You know, like, what would you do? Like, there's challenges and, you know, you persevered, and good on you, Joseph. You know, a lot of people would have stopped, but I think your story and your perseverance is going to help a lot of people. And I'm very grateful for that. So with that said, Joseph, where can people find you? Do you have any shout outs? And yeah.
So my Instagram is that bro Joseph. It's all under case underscore, whatever you want to say.
Yep.
ThatBroJoseph. You can follow me on there. Any questions, messages, anything, feel free. I may not answer at 3 a.m., but I'll answer eventually. And then, you know, mine and my colleague's website. Well, it's his website, but, you know, him and I's website.
For sure. And what's the website?
Credit where it's due, you know.
Absolutely. And what's the website handle?
Say what?
And what's the website? Is it progressiveparamedics.com?
Yeah, progressiveparamedics.com. We talked about changing the name, so if Progressive Paramedics doesn't work, try Progressive Medics. But
for sure,
we kind of slacked off because we both were in critical care school together, so we both kind of slacked off. But we're gonna start putting more articles out there and stuff like that. You know, we have a little forum for, like, you know, there's like 20 different sections of, like, calls, EKGs, stuff like that. You know, like, we want to make this something good. We want to make this a teaching moment. So yeah, you know, you can follow me on my Instagram, go to the website, sign up, whatever. Yeah.
Right on. Well, that brings us to the end of the podcast episode, Joseph. Thanks so much for coming on. I had a blast talking to you, and I've learned a lot. And I hope that our listeners took away at least one nugget of gold from the many nuggets that you threw out there. And yeah, thanks so much, my man.
Appreciate it. Thank you for having me on.
Definitely. And to the audience and viewers of the Personal Process Podcast, thank you for listening and watching another episode. And we're going to hit our outro now. Hey, everyone. Param back after another amazing episode with another amazing guest. We hope we added value into your life so you could take the tips from this episode and fuel your process forward. If you enjoyed our episode today and think other friends or family members may also appreciate the lessons that our podcast brings, be sure to share us with them. Subscribe and rate our show so we know how we did. And always remember, trust the process.